All right, good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me clearly? I hope so. And very briefly, let me just introduce myself. You can see me there. And that's me, Simon Lind. I'm trusting you can all hear me. And today we're looking a little bit about active learning in English. So the whole point about this is looking at what we can do in English. Very briefly, today we're going to look at how we do things, a bit of the course structure, and then looking at lesson planning. And the focus of all of this is about active learning. So it's looking at active learning and how we can incorporate this, particularly in planning and thinking about what we do. So the first thing that we are going to consider is very quickly, who are you? So what is it that you do and where does it come? So if we think about who in your classroom talks the most? Is it you or is it your students? Is your classroom very quiet? Now, I know this is a real challenge for many of us because whenever I talk to teachers, they say, well, we're sort of expected to be quiet. And, oh, well, I can certainly remember a principal of mine saying to me, children are not learning unless they are sitting in silence writing. I completely disagree with that, because I like to hear classrooms that have a busy noise, because it shows that the students are discussing things with each other, with their teachers. Looking again, do you encourage your students to memorize what's in the book? Are you expected to say, you do the work, in other words, here is a model answer, learn it? Or is there a lot of discussion that's going on in your classroom? Do you look at the textbook? Other sources? Do you read? Do you give rich chat and feedback? What about mistakes? Do the students in your class, are they terrified if they get something wrong because mistakes are bad? Or do you encourage this idea of it's an opportunity to learn? Okay, you haven't got it right this time, but learn from that. Let's see if we can move on. And do you have to do something written every lesson? I know I've been into schools where that is the expected thing, that at the end of every lesson, students have to write something because this is the way that they are evidencing, if you like, their learning. But we don't have to do that all the time. And again, when you're speaking to your students, are you just telling them, or are you actually listening to them and responding to questions and guiding their learning? So the next stage that we're going to move on to very quickly is just to give us a little bit of a helping hand. We have got a few questions in the poll, and this is where Victoria is now going to take over and deal with this.
That's right. Okay, so you should now be able to see two polls in front of you. One that asks you how confident you are in using active learning for Cambridge Primary English, and a second question, if you scroll down, that asks how challenging your learners find the Cambridge primary resources. And they're on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being not confident or not challenging, and 10 being to very confident or very challenging. So please do go ahead and add your responses to the poll that you can see. Great, we've got some people starting to vote. It's going to be really helpful for us to look at the people that attend our webinars and how confident they feel or how they're finding the resources, but also to help Simon in the here and now know a little bit more about you, the audience, and so he can best respond, meet your needs. Okay, so looking at what is starting to come in, we've got generally quite a good level of confidence in using resources. We've got 50% voted, so if you're still waiting to vote, please do. I'll leave it open just for another 30 seconds or so, so please do go ahead and vote. Again, if you're just joining or if you joined recently, please, the first thing to do is to go to the chat function and please change the to from all panelists to all panelists and attendees. That will mean that everybody can see the messages that you post rather than just the panelists, and that will be better for the working together as the hour goes on. We've got 60% voted. So again, if you've recently joined, please do just jump onto the polls there and add. I'll just leave it open for another couple of seconds. Good morning, Kamna. If you could please just change your to from all panelists to all panelists and attendees. Any more for voting? I'm going to close it in a moment. No? Okay, I'm going to end the polling and share the results. Okay, so let me see. Simon, can you see the results there?
I can, yes.
Okay, I hope everyone, and I'm sharing them, so you should all be able to view the results there. So we can see that the majority of answers lie. We have from middle to reasonable confidence when it comes to how people feel about active learning, and you know, most participants feel that the level of the text is about right for their students, but with quite a few more people thinking that actually they're a little challenging for their students.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing there and hand back over to Simon. Thank you for that.
Right, that's very, very interesting. So that actually gives us tremendous guidance, because what is great about that is that what we're looking at there gives me an indication of how we're going to focus and what the focus is today. And I've set myself some, if you like, some learning intentions. And by the end of this webinar, I want teachers to be more familiar, because obviously I think it's clear that you're using the primary English course, but also the biggest thing that we need to think about is when we do active learning, the focus is on learning. Now, when I did the face-to-face workshops at the end of last year, we had a big discussion about what do we actually mean by learning. And this is what we're going to look at today, because for many of us in the classroom, we think we're actually doing learning, but all we're doing is we're doing a series of activities. So we've got to really understand what's the difference between doing an activity in the classroom or planning for learning. I will make one or two controversial statements, but let me come to that in due course. So before we start there, we're going to have a quick look at what the Cambridge Primary English components and course is all about. Now, the first thing that we must understand is that this is not a textbook that is a beginning at the beginning and let's work through the textbook, close it at the end of the course, and we've covered everything. It's much more of a whole linked way of teaching. So firstly, at primary level, it's 6 stages. Now, sometimes you will find that actually you will start primary book 1 in KG, because although it's a 6-stage course, you have 5 years in primary. The thing that is most noticeable about this is that it is written to the Cambridge First Language English course. We do have books that cover the second language English course, but in the majority of the schools that we work in India, the expectation is that you will do first language. Now, this does lead us with a little bit of a challenge, for the simple reason that what the majority of students and teachers in India understand about a first language is that it's the medium of instruction. Whereas at Cambridge, we consider first language as actually the language that you learn first. In other words, it's your mother tongue. Now, this does lead a little bit to some challenges, but the point is that we're teaching English in English medium schools. It is very much a course that is endorsed for Cambridge assessments. And when we talk about assessments, you don't have to do any assessment at primary level. Here we're talking about the Cambridge checkpoint tests. These are done by many schools, but you don't have to do them. They're not compulsory. If you do choose to do it, it is for the English first language checkpoint test. Now, the very, very important element of this is that this whole course is designed to be adaptable and flexible and must be taught alongside a proper reading scheme. Now, what we mean by adaptable and flexible is that although there is a very good Cambridge curriculum, you can adapt that curriculum to meet your own school's particular needs. So you don't have to follow it absolutely exactly. It's more to do with guidance. So as a consequence, we actually call it a curriculum framework. It's not a curriculum, it's a framework on which you can blend your teaching. It's really, really useful to think about it in that way. You must do reading. For many of you that come from a CBSE or an ICSE background, you'll notice that there is quite a number of differences in the way that we approach certain things in the teaching of English. If your school is in transition from CBSE or ICSE to Cambridge, you can blend in the comforting teaching styles without having to feel that you are under pressure to deliver Cambridge exactly as it is. So this is a big consideration. It's a very adaptable, flexible course. Now, whether you are teaching first language English, second language English, whether you are doing CBSE English, ICSE English, it really doesn't matter. You need to have a full reading scheme. Now, that's outside the scope of this particular webinar, but I'm sure we can accommodate any questions that come up to that. So let's very quickly have a look at what do we mean by the Cambridge course components. Now, it's very clear that at Cambridge we approach things slightly differently. The most important element is the teacher's resource. Now, this is the book that is written specifically for teachers. There is a learner's book, and we'll see the difference between them in a second. The learner's book is written for the learners. That means that if you do your planning and your lesson preparation only from the learner's book, you are not getting all the benefits of the primary English course, because the learner's book is written for the learners. There is a huge amount of extra material available for every lesson, plus a lot of guidance in the teacher resource. So that should always be your starting point when you do it. A lot of the time, teachers say to me, the trouble they have with the English is there isn't enough guidance for them. And when I ask them for a bit more detail, I say, have you got the teacher resource? They say to me, no, my school wouldn't buy it. We don't need it. In Cambridge, you do. So if you don't have your teacher resource and if you don't use it, then get your school to get it for you. The other component is the activity book. Now, the activity book complements, in other words, it goes along with the learner's book. It doesn't give you the same exercises in the learner's book. It has additional material. It's a write-in book. We'll see this in more detail in a minute. And the final element is the digital classroom. Now, this is another teacher resource. And what we mean by this is it's not an e-book for students. It's a visual aid to be used through a whiteboard or just a projector and a screen that shows the whole class the book plus some extra elements for teaching, so that if you want to be able to display the book for the whole class to see, then you do it through digital classroom. So let's have a quick look at the details for each resource. Now, really, I've said that you cannot teach without it. Okay, if you don't have it, you'll manage. But it gives you lesson guidance. It's also got all the learning intentions, all the learning outcomes, suggestions for assessment, all the structure in it, plus all the checks for it, plus there are additional worksheets, spelling lists, and answers to all the questions in the learner's book and the activity book. So without it, you are going to struggle a little bit. Now, many teachers will cope, but it's not using it to its full effect. So we really need to think about how we do it. So this is an example of what the page could look like. And you'll see that I've highlighted a couple of boxes. Now, if this works, what you'll see is you will see that the first green box, there are learning outcomes, learning objectives. So for example, in this one, by the end of the unit, the learners will be able to identify characters and settings in real life stories. So we'll get the idea for the whole unit there. There's a unit overview. So it tells you what this unit is about, what the texts are in the unit, and what the aims and objectives are. Also, if you look at the right-hand side of the screen, you will see that in session 1, we talked about setting the scene. So each session has its own set of learning objectives. Now, excuse me, the idea behind it is that we've got very, very clear learning objectives, assessment opportunities, and when we talk about the assessment opportunities, we think about these as formative or summative. Formative is assessment opportunities that you can use while you are teaching the lesson. We'll talk about that again in a little bit more detail. Plenty of learning objectives, and they tell you what you want your students to learn. Now, this is absolutely key, because usually when we think about writing our lesson plans, we think about what is it that we are actually going to do, rather than what do we want our students to learn. There's a big difference between them. And also, you don't have to do every single activity. So that means that you use your teacher resource, you look at it, you decide what are you actually going to do. So that means that you select the lesson objectives based on your students' needs for that lesson. It's got the included, and you've got warm-up opportunities, you've got all sorts of opportunities to look through that. Now, in the learner's book, what you will have is usually a double page spread for each session. Where there are longer texts in books 4, 5, and 6, it will go beyond a double page because it's giving you a longer text. Lots of visuals. We are not prescriptive on lesson times. That's why we haven't called them lessons, we've called them sessions, because each lesson or session is adapted to the needs of your learners. In other words, if we say to you, oh, this session should only take 5 minutes, well, sometimes it might take less than 5 minutes. If your learners are not understanding it or have a lower level of English, it might take a bit longer. Therefore, you as teachers need to really carefully plan. So use your teacher resource, look at the texts in the learner's book, and decide how long you think you need, because you know your students. That's why we've made sure that it's the activities and the texts are adaptable. Okay, you don't have to do them, or if you want to extend it. For example, I was reading a little story, as we'll see a bit later on, and it's such a nice story, I decided that it would actually be a really good opportunity to read the whole story to the class. That's the kind of thing that we need to do. Now, for the structure of each of the whole course, 6 long and 3 short units. Now, it's written for a 3-term plan, but as you have 2 semesters, the way that you think about it is that divided not into 3, but into 2. So that although there are 9, you would make sure that what you would do is you would do probably 5 sessions in the first semester, 4 sessions in the second semester, balance it out that way. Leave yourself time towards the end of the academic year to do the assessments that you need to. Long units have 12 sessions. Short units have 6 sessions. Now, you don't have to do everything. Although there are 12 sessions, you don't have to do a session, or you can expand it. Lessons incorporate whole class teaching, which is mostly teacher talk, or lots of group work and individual work. Now, within each unit, we build vocabulary in particular. Now, this is the challenge with first language English. There are speaking and listening activities. There are plenty of them. However, in the first language English context, speaking and listening is not formally assessed. Just because it's not formally assessed doesn't mean you mustn't do it. In fact, you should do plenty of speaking and listening in each lesson, and you should be able to adapt it to use it as a form of assessment. Now, we have a big idea on focusing on reading, and the first part is reading as a reader. So we encourage you to read the texts for understanding. And that is very, very important, because when we go to the next one, which is applying or understanding what you've read, we look at it as reading as a writer. In other words, if you want to develop your writing skills, which is key to everyone, then you need to read and be able to read well. And finally, there will be a review of all of this. What it really does mean is that it's full of texts, and the texts should be a starting point for your lessons. It should be a starting point for the grammar, the punctuation, the phonics, the spelling, and the development of all 4 key skills. It's text-based. So here's an example of what it might look like. Now, in this particular case, what we've got is we've got it going well. And we look at a page of the book, and the first thing you will see is that in this unit, you will look at stories that are about children like you. So right from the beginning, it gives you an insight into what's happening. You'll notice that that is linked with what happens in the teacher resource, but it's not the same. There aren't learning objectives there. You have to get them from the teacher resource. So we look at setting the scene. And if we look at the bottom of the screen, it says talk about places. Look at the pictures. What are the places you can see? And we'll look at that in more detail in a sec. But basically, that is the activity to encourage setting the scene. So what we've got is we've got icons for different activities, language focus. All of these will build up the ideas. Now, the activity book is a write-in book. Again, you don't have to do everything. It gives you a lot of support. The most useful thing for the activity book is a way to show parents how well their children are progressing. So if you use it for that, that's the best way of doing it. And digital classroom, which is the final one that we look at, this is where the book is presented on a screen. It looks exactly the same, but you are able to show and point out things. It's really quite useful because the main thing that it has is a zoom function. And that means that you can blow up or enlarge the pictures so that it can become very clear for the children to see. Now, before we move on to the active learning session, Victoria is going to jump in with a couple of comments.
Hello, thank you so much, Simon, for that first half of the session. Please do post any questions that you have about what Simon has just said, either to the chat function or to the question and answer section that you can see at the bottom of your screen. If you'd rather post the question anonymously, you can change back to just all panelists, and then only myself and Riddimer and Simon will see it, or you can use the question and answer function. I'm particularly interested if you have any questions regarding what Simon spoke about between first and second language, or the global English and the primary English. If you've got any questions about the resources and how you're using them and how you want to use them, then please do post in the chat function or using the question and answer function you can see at the bottom of your screen. And I'll let Simon continue on with active learning.
Okay, welcome back. And what we're going to look at is we're going to look at active learning, and I'm going to walk through stage 3, unit 1. So it's a simple lesson, but I'm going to talk about how we would plan for active learning. And the starting point for this is understanding the learning cycle. Now, when we talk about the learning cycle, the key thing to do is to understand that what we want is for our students to learn. And by learning, it means that it's not just memorizing of knowledge so that you can write it down. It's actually developing an understanding, a conceptual understanding of what we are going to be learning rather than doing. So if we think about it, as many lessons, we do things. Why do we do them? Because we want our students to learn something through doing. Now, the key thing is planning. Now, sometimes this can be a bit controversial because most of our schools expect you to write lesson plans. Now, I think all lesson plans should be banned. Writing lesson plans is a complete waste of teachers' time. Instead, you should spend your time planning your lessons for learning, thinking about what do we actually want our students to learn. This means that we don't necessarily have to have a detailed plan for every single lesson. Instead, we should be planning over a sequence of learning. We then focus on our learning intentions. What do we want the students to learn? Then we look at success criteria. How do they and us as teachers know how well they're doing? In other words, are they succeeding or are they not? That's what we call success criteria, how they know they are learning. Those success criteria are linked to the learning activity. A learning activity is something that we will do in class that will help the students learn something. So, for example, if we want them to learn how to write good characterization. Now, characterization is a key element of being able to write effectively if we want to write about a good character. So a way of writing about a good character might be, well, tell me about your best friend, because your friend will have certain characters. The next activity could be, well, tell me about your father, tell me about your mother. They are different characters. The activities is writing about these different characters, but the learning intention is to write good characterization. For that, you need to give them feedback, formative feedback. It will help them know what they're doing. If you're giving them feedback, they need to make sure they are improving their learning through the activities, and this will involve your next sequence of planning. So think about what we are planning, and when we do that, we must consider from doing to learning, because this is where the active learning comes in. If we think about it, an objective tends to focus on the activity, not on the learning. So if we think about a learning intention, is what you want your students to learn by doing that activity. Now, this is, I know, quite a handful to get used to. So what we need to think about it is, the way that we can think about it is this. A learning intention describes what the pupils should know, understand, or be able to do by the end of a series of lessons. And it identifies something new, not something you're doing again and again and again, and it must focus on a transferable skill. So, for example, if we take our idea of a characterization or a setting of a scene, that is a transferable skill, because you can use scene setting whether you're writing a love story, whether you're writing a ghost story, whether you're writing an adventure story, you've still got to set the scene. Here is an example of the way that a school, in this case in Spain, has arranged their scheme of work. And it looks at session 1, setting the scene. It's in week 1, and it's to understand, the learning intention is to understand the idea of a setting. The learning outcomes, or the success criteria, is the learners can show the idea of setting a scene by discussing it and describing it. So this is what we do, is we need to think about what is it that we want them to learn. Now, the teacher resource in particular gives you a huge amount of help in this, because what it does is it gives you what we are going to be learning. A unit overview with its aims and objectives. By the end of the unit, learners will be able to identify characters and settings in real life stories. And so it goes on. So you must make sure that you refer to your teacher resource to get your learning intentions and success criteria. Use it alongside the learner's book, so they are all clearly linked. So when I was writing a lesson plan for this, I would look at the learning objectives from the teacher resource, and I would put those into my lesson planning. And it's putting them in exactly the same way. So you can see on the screen where I've taken the learning objectives from the teacher resource and I've incorporated them pretty much as it is in my lesson plan, which is on the right hand side of the page. And we have to link this to, well, if I am giving them a learning intention, how do I know they are learning? So if you look at the learning intention, we have understand the idea of setting. They can show an understanding of the idea of a setting in their discussions and descriptions. And they can do that by using appropriate adjectives and nouns in descriptions. So that's how we know they're succeeding. So a way of thinking about it is looking at this. The learning intention is the what and the why, and the success criteria is how they know they're learning. This is what makes learning active. They don't have to run around. They have to be involved in what they are learning. And they need to know the steps to take. So if we think about it, it's the success criteria is the steps, or the ingredients, if you like, the steps the student needs in order to fulfill that learning intention. This is what we mean by active learning. The students are involved in their learning, what they need to do, and how they are succeeding. A very simple way of thinking about it would be using I can statements. So you can get your students involved. So for example, how will you share the learning with them? Well, you could say, I can describe places I know. So if they can do that, they can tick the box, so can you. So I can statements is quite a nice way of looking at it. When you have got to your learning intentions and your learning outcomes, your next stage is let's introduce it. And the book and the teacher resource will give you a very clear idea. In this particular case, what we've got here is we've got 6 little pictures. And the discussion below is you can introduce them, say, okay, what are the pictures? So for example, A is a classroom, B is a bedroom, etc. But look at the activity below that. It's not teacher talk. Your students have to ask and answer questions. So it says there, look at the pictures. What are the places you can see? So we can do that as a general chat. And then, have you visited any of these places? Ask and answer the following questions. What did you do there? Why were you there? Did you enjoy being there? Did anything happen to you while you were there? So if we look at picture E, for example, it's on a beach. What did you do there? Well, we were there and we were on holiday there. So we did a lot of swimming in the sea. Did you enjoy being there? Oh no, I didn't really enjoy it because it was far too hot and I didn't like the sand because the sand gets everywhere and the sea is sticky. Oh, did anything interesting happen to you there? Oh yes, you could say. Something happened. There was a very big fight that happened on the beach between 2 other children. Now what we're getting here is, if you think about it carefully and you read your teacher resource, the children are setting the scene for a story. And those questions, those 4 questions, are the general questions that you would use to set the scene. So the activity is what they will do. They will talk to each other. What they're learning is how to set a scene. So it becomes quite clear that this is what we've got to look at as we do it. And in this case, what I've done here is this is how I've prepared it. You can build up the pictures so that you get a nice full size, and they can start picking out the details of what they're seeing in each picture. Once again, when we plan the activities, we're planning the activity for learning. So you can see there, I've just talked about that activity, and we need to think, what are we doing? The main activity, it's setting the scene. So the activity is linked to the learning intention. If, as most of you will have children of differing abilities. So encourage, and this is where, again, your teacher resource is critical. There are suggestions for differentiation. So encourage more confident learners to explore noun, verb, and adjective constructions. And less confident children may need a little bit of help for that. So you could, for example, as it says there, they can draw the word. And if you can draw a word, then it's probably a noun. So that's the way that we can think about differentiating activities. The book continues, and it's a lovely ordinary school day. And this is how we think about reading. And if we start reading this, it says, look at the opening of a story called Once Upon an Ordinary School Day. You would read this with your children. They have done some activities around it. Now we're seeing this reinforced in the textbook. And more importantly, it is being reinforced in the activity book. So this is where you, if you've worked through that in your lesson, you can now plan your plenary and reflection. And here is an activity that you can do right at the end or for homework that can reflect on what you are seeing in the scene. So this way of doing things is thinking about planning for learning. Now, when we look at this, we can see quite clearly that on the right-hand side, I've just taken a little extract of one of my plans for lessons, and I've said right at the bottom there, conclude with an activity from page 4 of the activity book, and A looks at underline the nouns and ring the adjectives, so they're reading instructions. And then for homework, what we could do is we could look at the homework activity, which I'm going to, in this case, choose B, and it says, take a view from a window and stick it in the box, or take a photo of a view and stick it in the box, or draw a picture and then label it so that you would have things. It's linked to what was done in the lesson. You are setting it up at the end of the class by giving a lovely plenary and an opportunity to reflection. And if you do homework, you then can build in that homework activity. Now, the activity book is great for homework because if you do it right, you can encourage your students' parents to become involved with it. This is another big element of active learning. You want everyone to be actively involved in their learning. Now, if you encourage the parents to get involved, not just stick the child in a corner and tell them to do the worksheet, but let them work through it, they can talk about what they're doing. So it's getting everyone involved in the learning. And one of the ways that you can say is, what are we learning and what are we doing? And if the children and the parents and you are able to tell the difference between what are we doing and what are we learning, then you're very much on the right track. It's all about understanding how this can happen. Now, very interesting from my perspective as well, because I go into so many schools where there is such a huge emphasis on we have to give marks, we have to give grades. Now, from an active learning perspective, that actually discourages learning, for the simple reason that if you give a piece of work and you give the students a mark or a grade for that piece of work. Oh, you got 7 out of 10, or you got a C grade for this particular piece of work. The students and their parents are just interested in the mark or the grade they get. It doesn't help them develop any learning. They say, oh, right, I've got 7 out of 10. They aren't even willing to look at why did I get those wrong? Or how can I get 10 out of 10 next time? There's no chance of an opportunity for improvement. Another big consideration, and I'm sure you've all seen this in your classrooms, is you give work back, and the first thing the children do is they look at their grade, and the second thing they do is they turn to the person sitting next to them and say, what did you get? In other words, it's about competing. They're not interested in looking at whether they've done well or not. All they want to do is to find out, did they do better than their friend next door? There is an opportunity for comparative assessment, but that tends to come at the end. You should consider, what do we do about assessing? And that is to give them some decent feedback, because what we need to think about is how well you are encouraging them to learn. So for this to be effective, students need to think about where they are in their learning, where they need to go next, and how they're going to get there. So instead of writing down, all right, you got 7 out of 10 for your story, you should be thinking about giving them some very, very helpful comments. Now, whenever I talk to teachers, I say, oh yes, they tell me, oh, we always do write comments, because they're encouraged to write comments. And I'm sure all of you write comments as well. But if you write a comment and give them a grade, they tend to ignore the comments. So we need to think, in your own mark book, write down the mark or the grade. On their piece of work, give them feedback, tell them what they need to do, how they need to get there. Don't give them the grade on that mark.
And if we can jump in there, Simon, I think that obviously the students and the parents do ultimately want to know the mark, but I absolutely agree with you, and that's what I did. We're both Simon and I are ex-teachers, is to give the students the work back with only the comment and not with the grade, and then the next lesson give them back the grade, or just separate. Give them time to really take in the comment, because Simon's, you know, we've all seen it. They look at the grade, and then they are instantly elated or demotivated depending on how they perceive that grade, without any real reflection on what they have done and how they have done it. Sam, before we move on to our own reflection section at the end of this session, I've just had a few questions. One I will respond to, and I'll bring the other two to you to respond to briefly. So the one question that I'll respond to, it was a very interesting one. You know, you made the great point, Simon, that you know, do students need to write something down every lesson? No, they do not. That is not necessary. However, we've had a question, is that actually parents expect to see things written down every day in every lesson. And I would say in that situation, it's about institutional change. As an individual teacher, you might find quite limited to change that, and you have to speak with your senior leadership team and hopefully get everyone on board, and release a policy to the parents that this is what you can expect to see in students' books, that they will do you know, a piece of extended writing once a week, and maybe some other shorter activities, but there won't necessarily be something every lesson. And if that goes out to parents with a rationale of how you are changing things, you know, you're changing all different aspects, giving comments separately to grades. If there's a change in policy document that goes out, that is far easier for the individual teacher to stick to and to deal with.
Can I just add to that? This is absolutely an integral part of active learning. And I'm sorry we've only got, well, just a few minutes left of this webinar and even less time because my computer is telling me that it's going to restart in 10 minutes.
Mine's just said the same, Simon. This is very inconvenient,
so
isn't
it's
it?
very inconvenient.
We clearly have some tech issue here.
So we are going to have to finish on time. But this is all part of active learning. And this is about a planning for active learning, that you need to plan that not every lesson is necessarily going to have a written outcome, and parents need to be educated that this is going to happen. They need to be involved in the learning. Absolutely agree with you.
And then I'm going to bring two other questions to you. So one, you spoke at the start about the need for the reading scheme. And we've had another question about how important is that to incorporate English literature. And I think I'd say my comment is, consider if, especially if teachers are using primary English, well, there are real bits of extended reading in there. So you really have to support their reading with a reading scheme.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Would you add anything else to that, Simon?
Yes. Basically, it says it very clearly in both the first and the second language teacher resources that this program is designed to be delivered alongside a reading scheme. You will not develop reading skills from the textbook alone. They have to read. Now, what we are talking about here is not just the phonics element, the decoding element of reading. It's actually reading stories. It's extended reading, reading for pleasure, and it's reading to develop an understanding and an appreciation of literature. That's what I'm talking about reading. It must be incorporated in every English course. I would love to advocate, and I do always say, if you have 6 or 7 English lessons a week, at least one, a minimum of one, preferably 2, should be devoted to reading.
Yes, absolutely. And then finally, I think I said we are going to be kicked off our computers, but maybe some last advice. I think what we'll do, Simon, is we'll the last slide we'll show is our plenary slide and let people do that themselves.
Well, I've got this
That's
one.
lovely. But yes, I see it. You're the next slide on maybe.
And the next slide.
I think we're going to have to reflection.
This one.
Okay.
And hang on, let's go. And it's
that's the one I want to leave people with. But just before we leave people with that, I wonder, Simon, if you could just speak just for 2 minutes on the challenge of having really large classes. We've had a participant point out that it's very common to have a ratio of 50-1, and many teachers say that active learning in this situation can be quite challenging. What top tip would you give to a teacher that has that size of class and is really hoping to do some active learning?
Okay, active learning can be, if it's done and if the questions are asked properly, active learning can be done by the teacher from the front of the class. Now, it is possible through very careful questioning and simple activities. A really good way is, even if you have 50 in a class, class management becomes a challenge, but if your students are managed effectively. Now, one good way is just to try and get them to work as a pair and to lay down some very, very clear ground rules that there are times when you will ask the students to consider, by talking to each other in pairs, consider an answer. And then, instead of asking the children to raise their hands to give an answer, you select students at random to answer for the whole class. Now, by doing that, every child has to think of an answer. They can't hide, or they can't just leave it to the very energetic, enthusiastic, bright children that always put their hands up to answer a question. So a very simple way of dealing with it is to say, this is a no hands up question, and that means I'm going to choose someone to answer the question. That's a simple way of it making sure that every student is actively involved in the learning. So get them to talk about their answer first with a pair, and then you choose who is going to answer. It's a simple strategy.
It's a great technique. So think, pair, share, and then this is a no hands up response. I'm going to choose people. Absolutely, and that's a great tip, a great skill to take away from today.
Mhm.
So we're going to have to leave you in a moment. One, because it is the posted end of the webinar in just 3 minutes, but also
Yep.
because unfortunately here in the Cambridge office, we've had a notice that our computers are going to shut down in 3 minutes. So we are forced to end on time.
It's such a nuisance.
We would happily stay here all day, but we're going to have to
Yeah.
end on time. So Simon has posted a reflection. And this is something we'd really like to leave with you. And if we had more time, it would be something we could add to the chat. If you want to add some of these comments to the chat now for your fellow participants to see and be inspired by before we leave today in the last few minutes, that would be wonderful. So you can see here, what changes are you hoping to see in your lessons? What changes are you hoping to see in your students? And what will you need in order to prepare? Like I said, Simon and I are going to have to go in a few minutes, but if you can post some of your responses to these reflection questions, or if you don't want to, if you can just maybe write them down on your own notepad, wherever you're sitting right now, just to let you really reflect on what we've gone over today and what you can take away from today.
Right, and I will just very briefly summarize very quickly what we are thinking about, and the emphasis here is on planning for learning, with a big emphasis on active learning. Doesn't mean the children are running around, it means they are actively involved in their learning. And you achieve this planning successfully for learning through using all three components plus parent education of the Cambridge Primary English Resource. So that means you need your teacher's book to get your learning intentions or your learning objectives. You can select the appropriate activities from the learner's book. You share that with the activity book, again, a selection of learning from that. You don't have to do written activities every single lesson, but that will involve you, your school and your parents working together to understand that active learning is a process in which all have a role to play and all are involved. So from my perspective, with 1 minute left, thank you very much for listening to me. I hope you have enjoyed it. I hope you've understood it. And
sorry,
I can wish you all the best.
And thank you so much, Simon. Just before I go, it's really important that I just send you a feedback link, because we'd love those people that have attended to share some feedback with us about how today has been. So just one moment. I'm just going to post it in the, oops, 1 minute. I think I am. Hold on a second. I want to be able to post this. You should be able to post it. I should be able to post a link to this, but I don't think I can. Just 1 moment. If you just keep an eye out on the chat, just as we finish now, I'll say goodbye, but if you just keep an eye on the chat before you log out, and I will post a link to the feedback survey in the chat. So I'll say goodbye now. Thank you so much to all those people who have attended. Thank you so much to those people that have asked questions and contributed. It's been really useful. Thank you, Simon, for a wonderful session. Thank you, Ridhima, for your support. And we hope to see you in the future on another webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.